Well, make yourself a big there's some coffee and fruit outside
Can everyone hear me? All good? Excellent. I have been told I have a rather large voice, even without a microphone. Wonderful to be here in your beautiful, beautiful town. When we arrived last night, I have to say I was a wee bit disappointed because it was raining and it was really cold. And I thought, oh, I haven't brought my warm clothes with me. And coming up from the south, because I live in Timaru, we were looking forward to the balmy temperatures, but this morning you have not let us down. And we walked from our motel round here, and it was just absolutely beautiful. So congratulations on your beautiful looking town. It's looking amazing. So I'd just like to we're going to introduce ourselves. So I'm Janie Annear, and I'm a commissioner, obviously, and I'm the chair of the Representation Review Subcommittee. And I've had 22 years in local government, believe it or not, 9 as a councillor of the Timaru district, and then 9 as the mayor of the Timaru district, and I've been a local government commissioner for 4 years now. So I've had a bit of experience about these things, and I also chaired the last round of representation reviews as well. So I'm going to hand you over to Brendan Duffy, get him to introduce himself.
Kia ora tātou, and thank you, Janie. So my name's Brendan Duffy. I'm also an old dinosaur of politics, I suppose. 21 years at the Horowhenua District Council, 12 of those as mayor, and I was appointed to the commission just some 18 months ago. So this is a very important and significant role, and delighted to be here to assist you in the decision-making process.
Thank you very much, Brendan. And I'm going to introduce Donald Rebos, who's our acting chief executive. And if Brendan thinks he's a dinosaur, I'm not sure what you are, actually. Donald, the floor is yours.
I'm, as Janie said, I'm Donald Rebos, the acting CEO of the committee.
Sorry, I have to turn you on.
After telling you to do it. I've worked in local government related issues for 40 years now, and spent quite a proportion of that time working for the Local Government Commission, and have worked on representation review issues since 1997, so including a couple of previous Gisborne district reviews. So I'm not saying there's nothing new I haven't seen, but
there's not much that he hasn't seen.
There's a way bit, I guess.
Thank you, Donald. That's fantastic. And I will ask Donald if there are any questions he has as well during the process, just in case there are some technical issues that he needs some clarification on. So it was lovely meeting you all as you came in, and we're really looking forward to this process. And please don't be daunted. You know, it is a hearing, and we do have rules, but it is very much, this is your place, and you should feel comfortable in it, and we want you to be comfortable. So I guess the key thing is, and somebody asked me this morning, now that council's made the decision, is the commission influenced by that decision? And I have to say, look, we are here today with a totally open mind, and we will gather all sorts of information. We would look at process. We are listening absolutely to you as well, and we will read all the submissions as well from the beginning of the process to the end. So I just wanted to assure you that the minds are open. Thank you. So the council is going to be given 35 minutes to outline the reasons for its decision, the process that it has taken, and then the commissioners will ask them any questions. All of you have been given a slot of 15 minutes. It would be great if you only used 10 of those, and then we could ask some questions as well. So that would be wonderful. The council then, after everyone else has made their submissions to us, the council then has a right of reply, and they have the opportunity to talk to any new information that's been brought up or anything that they really feel is important to emphasise at that stage of the process. As I've said, we've read all of your appeals, and we will, so you don't need to read them to us, but this is a great opportunity for you to highlight your views and any really key bits of information that you think it's important for us to listen to. But you do it however you are comfortable. Just a little reminder that this is about presenting the facts as you see them and your opinions to us, and we try not to personalise that at all. So it would be really good if we just didn't do that. And we don't allow any cross-examination. So the only people who ask questions are actually the commissioners. So after today, we will consider all the information we've heard. By law, we have to make a decision by April, where is it? 10th, April 10th next year. So but we of course will be working very hard. And as you're the first review, I'm sure we'll have our decision out way earlier than that date. So just health and safety, I guess, you know where the toilets are and where would you like them to meet? Should there be an emergency? Excellent. I'm not very good at health and safety, but I know that it's down on my wee list of things to do, so I thought I'd better do it. So we'll break at about 10:40 for morning tea. And thank you so much for giving up your time to come speak to us this morning. It is much appreciated. And now I call upon the council to make its presentation.
Ina mana, ina rio, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present our proposal to here today. I am really proud to speak on behalf of the Gisborne District Council today, not because I love the limelight, but because I have the opportunity to speak to the robust process Council undertook for our representation review. I'm not going to get into the huge amount of detail that we have considered throughout our journey. There are several hours of video footage, many reports, and loads of detailed analysis of submissions. Enough, in fact, to keep you busy for a few weeks. We have supplied you with every video and report where we discussed our representation review. And everything that I will say here today can be found in those videos and reports. My goal here today is to provide an overview of our process and also the reasoning behind our decisions. So next I will talk about our process, our deliberations, and our decisions. And I will quickly run through the slide and then I will get to what did our community tell us. So as you can see on the slide, we followed a well-structured, iterative process. We started with our pre-consultation back in September of 2017. We then discussed that feedback at a council meeting in February of 2018. And in March of 2018, we considered some initial proposal options. We then decided and consulted on this initial proposal during March and April of 2018. Our community then came back to us with more submissions, and at the end, we discussed our final proposal in May 2018, and we notified it. So next, what did our community say to us? So let's go back to our initial pre-consultation in September of 2018. Our community sent out clear signals. They said to us, we definitely have communities of interest and we have a desire for local decision-making. They also told us that they have a preference for at-large as opposed to wards. They encouraged council to consider community boards, and they also considered encourage council to consider the number of elected members. So after we looked at the information we received from our community, what did council put forward? For our initial proposal, we did consider multiple options. We acknowledged that the status quo was very non-compliant with the plus minus 10% requirement. One of our wards, the Matakau Waiapu ward, was 21.2%, and the Tawhiti Uawa ward, 23.1%. We understood that with variances like these, there was no strong case for non-compliance in favour of isolated communities. And we considered that more fair and effective mechanisms were available for us to try and achieve better representation. So Council went out and tested the waters with its initial proposal. And as you will see, we stuck to our ward system, similar to the status quo, but what we did, we used some minor boundary adjustments to try and achieve compliance and attempting to maintain our communities of interest. This was a bit of a risky approach, which created new problems that were highlighted by submissions to our initial proposal. For example, we tweaked boundaries of rural wards to try and get the numbers to fit, but in the process, we removed people from their communities of interest. We received submissions from residents in the Poverty Bay Flats that they were not happy with being shuffled around to wards that they had no common interest with. We also received a lot of feedback that residents were not happy that we were proposing to increase the number of councillors. Once we suggested an increase during our initial proposal, feedback was clear that people wanted a more streamlined council. We consulted widely, and in addition to public notice requirements, our community engagement took advantage of our most effective consultation avenues. We used social media extensively, our website, as well as flyers. We also aligned it with our LTP consultation process and presented it at over 30 community meetings. Next, I will discuss our initial proposal hearing, our consideration of those submissions, and the workshop we had. Our council meeting on the 10th of May was a watershed moment for elected members. For over 4 hours, we robustly debated all matters on the single topic of representation. We thoroughly workshopped and considered at length all the submissions received on the initial proposal. These submissions were wide and varied and called for change. In light of the submissions, we considered multiple options again, testing if they respected our communities of interest and whether they were the most fair and effective models for Tairāwhiti. We even considered some options more than once. We considered them through our community of interest as well as our fairest model lenses and eliminated options that did not satisfy this test. The majority of opposing submissions to the initial proposal called for a reduction of councillors for efficiency reasons. We also realised that tweaking at the edges created new problems and that we should create a fair model that will not need tweaking every few years. Councillors as well as the community talked a lot about future-proofing, which perhaps was best summed up by one of our submitters, and I quote, "If we go with what you have planned, we will find ourselves having the same arguments the next time you have to do this. Stop mucking around and give us a long-term, future-proofed solution." After our 4-hour session, the only option that passed all our tests and that we as governors were proud to recommend as the best option to serve our communities of interest and to be the most fair and effective model was our final proposal. So next I'll talk a little bit about our communities of interest. Right through our consultation period, when we did our initial consultation, pre-consultation and then our initial consultation, our community definitely said to us, we do not want to lose our local voice. 3 distinct communities of interest emerge from the consultation and the deliberation process. And as you can see on the slide, they are our Western rural area, our East Coast rural area, and also our city. Our final proposal acknowledges and provides for these communities of interest in a fair and effective way. So now I'm going to talk about our final proposal. At this stage, we have 13 elected members plus the mayor. We have 5 wards, 1 city ward and 4 rural wards. 9 members are part of the city ward, and we have 4 rural councillors, 1 for each rural ward. We have no community boards, and we have no Māori wards. For our final proposal, we will have 9 elected members plus the mayor. We have responded to the community's call for a more streamlined council with reduced councillor numbers. All councillors will be elected at large, meaning for the first time, our voting public will have a say in electing all councillors. For the first time, our rural communities will be able to vote for all 9 councillors. They will no longer be confined to choosing only 1 representative from within the ward boundaries. We will have 3 new community boards, 2 rural and 1 city. 2 councillors will be appointed to each community board, and 4 community members will be elected to each community board. This model gives us strong rural representation that is fair and effective. It provides 4 extra community voices and their networks for the East Coast, as well as 4 extra community voices and their networks for our Western rural area. On top of that, there will be 2 appointed councillors for the East Coast and 2 appointed councillors for the Western rural area. The appointed councillors will maintain a strong rural presence around the council table. To further ensure specific representation for communities of interest, we introduced 4 subdivisions for the rural community boards, with 2 members elected to each subdivision. These subdivisions follow the same boundaries as the current rural wards. We also acknowledge that the city is a community of interest where there will be 4 extra community voices and their networks, as well as 2 appointed councillors. All in all, it is a win-win situation. For our community boards to be successful, we will need to ensure they are well supported and that they have appropriate delegated authority as well as resources. We are not here today to try and justify the validity or efficiency of community boards, as this is well covered in legislation. They are used to great effect in other parts of New Zealand, and we can learn from these examples. We are also well aware that from the outset, it is important that their structure is sound, and we believe our final proposal achieved this. Our final proposal was workshopped extensively by all of council, and on the final day, not one vote was recorded against our well-structured proposal. It was different to the initial proposal, because we responded to the submissions of our community. This opened up the opportunity for the community at large to have a further say in our representation arrangements. As such, the final proposal was well socialised with members of the public through all our normal avenues of communication and engagement. Our final proposal received extensive coverage in the local newspaper. It even consumed the front page at one stage. Throughout this entire process, there has been ample opportunity for community input, and this was well published. So to conclude, we followed a thorough process where we tested options with our community. We listened to their feedback, and after considering everything on the table, we reached a future-proof proposal that respects communities of interest and provides fair and effective representation. As councillors, we respect the fact that if we ask for feedback, we need to listen and also be prepared to change. Our community has signalled very clearly that they are ready for transformation. We believe the final proposal provides more opportunity for diversity and community leadership. It provides a future-proof solution for our predicted population change. It is also responsive to our community's need to participate in all levels of decision-making. We are well aware that this final proposal will mean further changes to the way we work as an organisation. For example, we might have to change our committee structures to accommodate our new way of operating. This process, together with our final proposal supported by Council as a whole, is a clear example of democracy in action, and we believe it is the most fair and effective representation model for Tairāwhiti's communities of interest, as well as for Tairāwhiti's future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brendan.
Are you comfortable that having gone through the process and reaching the final decision that you collectively made, that your community has an understanding of what it means, what representation means now?
Yes, I am comfortable. This was extensively shared with our community. Right from the beginning, we used our LTP process, so the community was involved from the beginning. Like I said, this has been extensively covered in the media. So yes, I am comfortable that the community are excited about this.
Just a quick question from me. I guess in your earlier engagements with the public through the submission process, was there a strong push for community boards?
There was definitely, if you take a look at the submissions,
Which I have, yeah.
50, I can't 100% recall it now, but if you look at the bar graph, more people ask for at large than for the status quo. So there was definitely an indication from our community that they are ready and willing to move in this new direction.
But community boards?
Oh, community boards,
Yeah,
sorry, I was
sorry.
saying. Yes, there was.
I know there was some
yes,
submissions,
so there was
but,
definitely.
but I didn't see a large number of submissions supporting community boards. So I guess, can you help me with the process? Because you didn't go out in any of your initial options,
Yes.
with community boards being mentioned, what led you in your thought process to, and you said that, you know, you were responding to the community.
Yes.
So that it was quite a big and steep change from what you had actually earlier consulted with the community about.
So I think when we started off, in our initial consultation, I'm not sure, and I'll ask staff, there was mention of community boards in our initial
Yeah, I can add some
Great,
thinking
thank
to
you.
that space. So it was there were comments through the pre-consultation process around the advent or opportunity of community boards that probably came through stronger once the initial proposal was out in the community. So there was quite extensive conversation around that. There was a multitude of letters to the editor, etc., which we took account of, which council took account of when they were developing its final proposal. There were certainly communications of that nature in terms of formal submissions to the initial proposal as well.
So,
in particular, there's quite a good submission there from a member of the public, Manu Keri, which talks quite a bit about the opportunity of community boards to service, communities of interest.
Great, thank you. Just a further subsequent question on community boards. Have you made some decisions about how you're going to make them fair and effective? And are you going to give them delegated authority? You know, because I know that some people think that community boards are absolutely, toothless, and that they are no substitute for a rural voice at the table. So have you thought about how you're uniquely going to make your communities community boards a fair and effective voice for those three communities that you pointed out?
So like I said earlier, at this stage, we have not drilled down to any detail, but if you take a look at the final proposal there, what we are saying is we will have to look at best practice, and I know Rotorua, Coromandel, there are community boards out there that function very well, and we do not have to reinvent the wheel that way, but we will need to make sure we have proper delegated authority and proper funding. But just coming back to our community boards, how we know that it will serve our community well is that we discussed how can we keep that local voice and have more networks and people in those vast rural areas, as well as our community of interest in the city. So we will have elected members, four elected members, and in our rural wards, we'll have those subdivisions to make sure some of our community members come from the north, some of our community members come from the south. But what we really felt strongly is that we wanted to make sure there was a voice at the table, and that is why we will have 2 elected members appointed, 2 district councillors appointed to each voice, to each board, to make sure we keep that rural voice at the table.
So sorry, I'm being a pain about this, but so the work that the community boards are going to be doing, in my experience, are a bit different than the work that council does. So how, when you're dealing with the local issues in the local communities, how do you are you sure you're going to get that real rural view about all sorts of things that council is involved with, even though they may not be discussing them at the community boards? And I guess the financials, the rating, that kind of, that side of things.
Well, because this is a new way of how we plan to operate, we will have to make sure we structure the terms of reference properly so that when we go out and we have our community board meetings, that we make sure the stuff is discussed and the voices from our rural communities are brought to those community board meetings and then subsequently is brought back to council. So at this stage, we have no firm terms of reference yet, but it is our intention to make sure, like I said, set up the structure well right from the beginning so that we do get the community voice. We have lots of informal community boards already, so we know it can work. What we are looking at is formalizing that to get more community voices and their networks in such a vast rural area to the west and the east. We will now have 4 people, extra people, and their networks bringing issues to a community board meeting where there will be 2 appointed district councillors who will then be the direct link to this table where we will be making decisions. So we are confident that it will work very well for our community.
Thank you. I'll ask Donald, is there anything at this stage, Donald, you'd like to ask?
No.
Okay, then we'll do it at the end. Brendan.
So just extending this point of discussion, 2 questions. First one is that given the enthusiasm by by your council to establish the community boards. I'm pretty keen to understand in a bit more detail how you anticipate. So will there be delegations or not? So I'm trying to get a bit more sense around what your expectations are of the board, of the community boards, and further, do you anticipate that the councillors appointed will have voting rights at the community board meetings?
Can you just repeat question 1 for me?
So question 1 is around delegations. So
Oh, yes.
there's clearly been a lot of discussion and through the decision-making process, which means that there's, I would anticipate there's a significant level of understanding or comfort about what the new structure will do. So I'm keen to understand what you anticipate in terms of what you would delegate to the community boards.
I'm not 100% clear at this stage what we will delegate to the community boards, but there is a clear signal that local decision making will happen there. It will be parks and reserves. It might be even local funding, roading funding, but as a council, once we have our final structure ready, we will then set up our community boards, terms of reference, their delegated authority in order to make sure that local voice and that local participation is well represented. So at this stage, I can't comment on the absolute details around the community boards, but I can say that there will be delegated authority to make sure some rural voice is heard clearly at the table, representing that area well. And the second was voting. My expectation is that councillors will vote, but again, like I say, once we decide and once we receive our final proposal, then as a council, we will have to sit down and nut out these details. So at this stage, I can't give you a definitive answer, but we will work out those details once we know what we are working with. Yep, that is our expectation.
Right. Thank you. Now, you talked about when you went out with your ward systems, you know, that they exceeded the plus or minus 10%. And I know that the previous commission did allow you, in fact, to do that. And in those days, isolation was the only factor that you were able to bring in to the discussion, and that the commissioners were allowed to make that decision on. But since that, there has been some softening of the rules, and I know that your officers did highlight that in their report to you. Yep. So you didn't think that it was worth coming with that ward situation and thinking, you know, traditionally that you could have actually extended that a little bit more.
As you can see, when we went out with our initial proposal, we did take that view. Let's stick to the status quo and see how we can massage the numbers a bit more. But what we then saw, and it is recurring every few years, is that we create new problems by doing that. So when we did go out initially with our ward system, and we did try to make, because 21.2 and 23 points are numbers that are very far removed from the 10% requirement. So when we went out with that initial thinking that we will try and see, as in the past, if we can make it work, we then realized by doing that, we are removing people from their communities of interest, and we are tinkering around the edges. So we did initially think we will try and do that, but unfortunately, in order to do that, we had to increase some councillors in the city. People responded to that and said, we do not want to have more councillors. And also, like I said, we then, by doing that, created new problems. So to us, it was a clear signal, maybe stop tinkering and create a model that is future-proof so that every few years we don't come back and tinker.
Did you think of keeping status quo with the boundaries the same and coming to the commission to be allowed to have that deviation of the plus
we did consider that, but we acknowledged that the status quo we understood that with variance, there was a strong case for no,
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 okay, okay, even though the commission had allowed it in the past,
but not those types of variances, no.
not those kind of,
No, vast, 21 and 23%.
I'm not quite sure about that, but anyway,
That's my understanding.
James.
Sorry, through the process, I recall one of the concerns was actually about population projections, and also around the fact that if you look at the previous round, this round, there'd been quite a marked deviation from the plus or minus 10% rule. And I guess a fear going forward that was only going to continue.
It was.
And so that's right. And so the community in the submission process talking about future proofing, and that we're having to revisit the same argument time and again became a concern for councillors at the time.
I would have thought those wards would have been the more isolated wards, and they wouldn't have had such an increase of population going forward.
Our history tells us that's not the case if you actually look at the percentage change. So they've worsened over time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, plus it's minus 21%. Sorry,
Okay,
so yeah,
So it's a
decreasing population in the wards that have been identified and too deviant from plus or minus 10%. So we did talk about the Section 19 amendment, which allowed for, like you say, a softening of the rules around isolated communities. I guess it's one of the options, and obviously something to be considered and was considered during the process.
Great, thank you. Just one quick last question for me. Because you are a unitary authority, you have extra delegations and functions that you have to take on. So you're obviously comfortable as a council that the reduced number of councillors will still enable that to happen?
Yes, we are comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your submission, and we look forward to hearing from you again later in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kerry, would you like to come up? Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Show me. I can just hop straight to it.
Great stuff. You just do it however you feel comfortable.
All right. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak to my submission. I wish to make 2 points only, really, in regards to the proposed changes to the ward system for our elected local councillors. Firstly, that the proposed new system whereby councillors would be elected at large and community boards would be used as a proxy for rural representation was brought, in my view, upon the rural community by stealth, essentially. I acknowledge that this was not the intention of the councillors who adopted this policy. However, it was the outcome. I am here to say that I don't believe that that's an acceptable outcome. As a rural community, we, particularly in the Western rural wards, were led to believe that the proposed changes to the ward boundaries were a matter of complying with the Local Electoral Act, and therefore adjusting ward boundaries was going to occur in the eastern wards, north of Gisborne, and for that reason, it really didn't appear on our radar to any great degree. At no point was it suggested that to those of us outside the eastern region, particularly in that first round of consultation as mentioned, that those of us outside the East Coast region, that our own wards would come under threat, much less be abolished entirely and amalgamated into an at-large system. Had this been the case, I imagine many like me would have submitted in the first instance, and councillors would then have been better informed on what the rural community expect from their elected representation. My second point is that the current proposal, in my view, does not adequately ensure the productive base of the Tairāwhiti region is represented in local government. Community boards, I believe, are a poor substitution for a rural ward councillor with full voting rights, and their inclusion in this proposal merely shows that the councillors promoting them acknowledge the fact that full rural representation is an unlikely outcome of the new ward system, one that will require remedial measures to ensure councillors are not entirely devoid of sound judgment, information, etc. on rural policymaking decisions. Even a cursory glance at the region's demographics will highlight the fact that urban candidates are much more likely to be elected under the proposed system and that any of their rural counterparts will be at a disadvantage simply because they are not as well known as they are within their own local areas, their local communities, as mentioned. This is significant because the rural community and economic issues tend to be complex, often expensive, and something that's quite often relegated to the too hard basket. They tend to cost a lot of money often, they tend to be very slow to move, rural issues, particularly where roading and big ticket items like that are concerned. If we don't have a voice on that, they're very unlikely to be progressed in the way that we need them to be progressed. It's important that the base of Tairawhiti's economic pyramid is not undermined by poor local body support. In order to ensure that, I believe we need a seat at the table. Otherwise, in my view, we're likely, as a friend of mine often says, to end up on the menu. Also, just in response to some of what was just covered prior to my slot, I think it's important that if we're going to object, that we also have something to suggest as an alternative. And I ask, was there or is it possible to consider that rather than having an entirely at-large system, if we have rural at-large and urban at-large, so there are 3 rural councillors taken from anywhere, or city. Is that possible? I'm not sure. This is obviously.
So I'll just get Donald to answer that question, since he's our walking local government encyclopedia.
Cool.
So essentially what you'd be wanting would be an urban ward and a rural ward. I guess that's theoretically possible. It would be subject to the population distribution.
Yeah.
But in theory it is possible.
Right. Okay, so that would be my proposition. Particularly if there is a strong support, and I imagine there is, for a more efficient system, because I'm afraid I don't agree with the councillor earlier. In my view, community boards are an increase in complexity rather than streamlining. In fact, adding a further layer of complexity, gathering, conveying information, I don't see how that equates to more efficiency, perhaps in cost terms, but you're really asking people to donate their time voluntarily. I don't imagine the community boards will be paid roles. And essentially, you're asking more people to do the job that was being done by fewer people before. You're essentially adding how many people? 12, where an extra 3 councillors were before. So I think you're really asking more from more people as opposed to less. And also the assertion that community boards are universally successful is, in my view and in my experience, certainly not true. They are variable in terms of their success, and it seems to depend very much on the way that they're implemented. And from what I've heard so far, it doesn't appear that there's a particularly clear plan, and simply waiting to see if we're allowed boards before we determine what they're going to do and what authority they have. I don't think that that's good enough. I think that we should have a very clear view in order to decide whether or not that is what is good for the region, rather than saying this is what we'll have and then we'll try and make it good for the region. In fact, I come from Rotorua originally, and my experience being rural in Rotorua is that, in fact, losing rural wards has not been good for the rural areas in Rotorua. But of course, that's purely my experience. But yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for coming, and you spoke particularly well, may I say. Can I pass on to Brendan?
I think we need to get one point clarified if we can, which is the issue around whether community board members will be paid or not. Be quite useful if officers could provide that clarity, what the expectation is.
Yes, they will be paid.
Might be useful just to expand where that comes from, just so that everybody understands. So just explaining how the bucket works, the funding bucket.
So council receives a pool of money as determined by the Remuneration Authority. That's a big bucket, and then that bucket gets divided up so that the rules have changed a little bit. So the council will determine the salaries of the community board members and effectively their own salaries. But it's a limited pool of funds. So we have some ability to do job sizing. So it will be according to the amount of work that the community board members will be undertaking. So if it's it will be the meeting cycle, reading time, consultation with community members is all included. Oh, and it's population based.
So the increase in numbers will or will not increase efficiency per se. Obviously, there will be 4 rural board members for the 3 wards, which is 12 people.
I think as the commissioners spoke before, that the community boards will be doing different work to the councillors. So it will be more community focused, operationally based, things that are about the community, as opposed to making huge decisions about the whole region.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been lovely meeting you. Thank you very much. Graham.
Greetings and good morning. I was already introduced to most of you. So, first of all, make it quite clear that I'm here as I'm not representing the recommendation of council, obviously, and you'll be aware of that. But the fact that I am on the council and I'm quite comfortable that this is a legal remedy allowed under the Local Government Act, that we can actually have this sort of like last say, if that's the way to put it. So I'm quite comfortable with that we're following a legal remedy allowed under the Local Government Act. Right. First of all, May 10th, I don't believe it was a watershed moment. It was actually a gobsmack moment and there were some very unfortunate circumstance around it where aircraft couldn't fly, and one of the most experienced rural candidates couldn't attend the meeting, and the mayor couldn't attend a meeting because of that, and a medical emergency for elderly parent of another, that was myself, and I couldn't attend. So effectively, there were three of councillors not at that meeting, and 2 rural councillors and the mayor. And it was, they were going to, we had options, we'd discussed options around how the wards would be divided up, but we'd never ever talked outside how the wards would be divided up. There were some issues around how the wards would be divided up. And when we came back the next day to find that the discussion had transferred into a totally different hemisphere, and there had been a whole day's workshop on community boards, I just felt that, to have gone down that track with more than half of your rural councillors or half of your rural councillors not there, and the mayor not there, it was, I just think that the balancing debate was missing from that workshop, and we've had the picture painted where it was a wonderful time with everybody in agreement and a unanimous decision. I can tell you that the 4 rural councillors disagree with it, and the mayor, while at the time, he said, I would prefer wards at that time. By the time the final decision came at the next meeting, it was a done and dusted sort of thing, and any balancing debate fell on deaf ears really at that stage, and that's what happened. So it wasn't really quite like it was portrayed to you in the earlier deliberation. So I'll just start off with a bit of history here. Prior to amalgamation, there was a treaty or a sign between all the counties. That was Waikahu, Waipu up the coast, Cook and Gisborne, and there was a couple other boards like Catchment Board and that around. But there was a treaty signed around representation and the levels of representation, and that was presented to the then Commission and was agreed upon by all the counties, and the Commission accepted that as where we would go in the future. Now, that was an agreement signed. You know, that was something that, and I know that we've had population variation through the time, and we've had to make adjustments, and yes, but you know, it just the fact that there can be thrown away without any consideration to me, sort of just is a real concern, and that, you know, we went into this thing with an agreement, and it can be thrown out so lightly, and more so against the wishes of the rural councillors who I believe know their communities just as well, if not, well, no, they do. They know their communities better than the city ward councillors who sit around here and were the ones present on the gobsmack day. Okay, so through that time, the population. So originally it was 8, 9 or something. But that has been reduced down to 4, 9 because of population, and obviously we've got a slight problem now with where that goes to keep the representation. And I know at that time we could have applied for that give and take thing. I know, and as you say, around the community's interest, and I don't believe, while we had put that up as an original with a little bit of area, we were trying too hard to make the exact figures work, and in that case we isolated a few people from their community's interest. Whereas, you know, I think if we had said, well, we're comfortable with where we're at and applied for it, I believe under the circumstances we might have, you know, that might have been a reasonable solution. Okay, we had we looked for an answer of solving the problem, I think, when it was mentioned by a speaker just before, there was an obvious answer with regard to rural representation, and that is that 2-ward system, one rural ward, where it gives a rural ward candidate a very real chance of getting elected, and that's by having, say, and the numbers do stack up quite well with 3 rural ward councillors, and you can actually then reduce that number down by, it would be reduced by 1, and then you can also reduce the city ward down to 8, and 3-8, the numbers would stack up with a 2-ward system. So that would work very well, and that would guarantee to give you that extra diversity of knowledge, and that having someone from the rural. Right, the government calls for diversity with regard to cultural and gender and interests, and by and large, this council has achieved this quite well, just using the democratic process has generally done quite well with that. And I said, do we need rural and urban diversity? And I think we do in GDC in particular. You know, has 2 or 3, because we have 2 or 3 major budgets which account for a significant percentage of our targeted rates based over the divide of rural and urban, and that's wastewater, water, roads, and UAGC, the roading differentials and UAGCs. Now, I'll just step aside from my notes here. Over the years, there's that constant pressure on financial policy where do we include some of the wastewater? And initially we include some of the wastewater funding in, we took some rural payment to assist with that in the rate. So a contribution rather to assist with that because it was such a big step at the time. And then as we got over that, we stepped back to it being a targeted rate within this because that's where that cost was used. And it comes up time and time again, every 3 years when do we charge the wastewater or the water systems in the city across the region? And, you know, it's argued by the rural candidates that the cost of them providing their own water is several times more, their own water and waste systems is several times more expensive, their self-provision, than the council rates to the urban people. And yet, it still squeaks in on the vote, you know, like people still see that. And I just think, I'm not saying that it's done unfairly, it's just people see things differently when it affects them. And I know that had it not been for a few city councillors with septic tanks who just live on the hemisphere of the city or just on the outer edges, you know, those sorts of costs would be transferred across the whole district. It's the same with roading. We have differentials where a roading cost is applied to farms and a differential is applied to farms and forests. And if you don't have that participation by that farming group and by that forest, you know, the people who understand rural, they just become so easy. And I'm not saying people do it to be unfair. I think it's just how they see things. It's that diversity of view. And if we do the single ward system where the city is such a big majority of people, it's not inconceivable that we will not have that rural representation. And to a certain extent, that's where I see a problem with the board system, because it's all very well for a city person to trot out to a board based in a rural zone and listen to their thoughts, but they're not representing that board with that rural eyeglass to speak. They're not with that rural mindset. You know, they're not from there. That's not where how they see things. And again, it's a focus. It's not a right and a wrong, but it happens. So reduction of numbers. Okay, we could probably. I'd be happy with 8 and 3, and possibly as on a 2-ward system, but the Local Government Act requires unitary authorities to have clear separation between 2 functions, and that's absolutely stated. It's clear. It requires a clear separation between the 2 functions. We don't do that well here, I don't believe. We've had times when there is conflict. For example, the environment and planning function imposed a fine on the operations function for a spill of sewage, and yet we had people sitting on both committees, both function committees, one imposing the fine, one having to defend it or pay it. And in my opinion, that's where we break down from clear set, because of the numbers, we're pushed for numbers to get that clear separation. We've got you know, that's likely to happen again. It can happen again. We may have times coming up in the near future where large infrastructure damage in the east from recent flooding has been caused, and we need to have that clear separation there to sort that out, because there's going to be definitely the 2 functions of the unitary involved. And if we get down to a very low numbers of councillors, you just cannot have that clear separation. It's as simple as that. You know, white can't be black and black can't be white when it comes to painting a pretty picture. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Okay, yeah, I've waffled through most of the, way ahead of what I'm going to say most of the time, but anyhow, just, you know, I just think that I'd just like to point out, we've got, in the ward to the east, we've got 120 kilometres from one point to the other. In the ward to the east, we've got 30 kilometres from one point to the other. We've got so many points, communities of interest out there, and every single one of those communities has their own little group already operating, and they are serviced by the rural councillors. We have, in my ward alone, I have 8 communities, 8 sort of communities where we have annual, you know, the annual plan meetings. We go to them. That's serviced, and I go to my wards with that rural perspective. Up the coast, it may be even more, but it's the same. Every is a community of interest, and those people want to be involved in their community. They don't want to be involved in one board that starts 300 kilometres away with an interest 300 kilometres. They want to be involved, and they don't want. I don't believe they would be served well by a couple of town councillors trotting out who don't really have that rural outlook on their viewpoint, and also the boards. They don't sit round the table making financial policy, creating financial policy, arguing financial policy. They don't do that. They don't have that opportunity. So, you know, when policy is created around here, maybe. So I just think that we need to stick with some rural representation in the form of council representation. We need to probably comply with the rules as best we can and can get away with it. But it's such a huge area. We're talking hundreds of kilometres and such diverse interest groups.
Thank you. You've made your point really clear. Just one thing on process. The option of having a notice of motion to make the council re-debate that decision again, did you not have the numbers to be able to do that? Or you just didn't wish to do it?
9 city board councillors, 4 rural councillors, you know, it's been an issue for the last 18 years on everything I've debated and every issue that we have a rural angle to. And this definitely has a rural angle to it, you know, and it just doesn't work. You know, once people get their minds made, no, I wouldn't have had the numbers. Right. And you can go back right through. I've been sitting around this table for 17 years, and it's time and time again, there is that rural urban split, and it's clear because that's how people see things. I'm not saying they're wrong and they're right. It's how people see things, and no, we wouldn't have had the opportunity, I believe, for the way people thought.
Okay, thank you very much. Donald, anything you need? No. Great. Thank you so much. Right. Hamish. Welcome, Hamish.
Good morning.
Good morning. We've read your submission and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Yes, good morning. I'm a farmer at Ngatapa on the rural western side of Gisborne. I'm here today to object to the option recommended by council of 1 ward at large and 3 community boards, 1 in the east, 1 in the west and 1 in the city. I have 3 main reasons for my objection, and I will just go through those. I would like to draw to your attention a letter from the GDC Chief Executive Officer on the 23rd of May. On the 10th, it reads that on the 10th of May, the council considered all submissions at a hearing at which 3 opposing submitters attended and 2 spoke to their submissions. Council accepted the following submissions on the basis that they identify the district's communities of interest and meet the principles of fair and effective representation. I would like to challenge, what is fair and effective representation? How did the council arrive at what is fair and effective representation? They do list some reasons around population equity, rural representation, city representation. The letter also goes on and says that the council considered its response to the following submissions on the basis of providing fair and effective representation for the district's communities of interest by reducing the number of councillors and wards and establishing community boards. Again, I challenge the council on how did they arrive at what is fair and effective representation. If I was to ask you and every person in this room what is fair and effective representation, I'm sure we would get a list that is long and varied. So I say to you, let's turn this around. The rural wards make up the largest geographical portion of the district. So perhaps on that basis, the rural councillors should be the majority councillors. To me, that is fair and effective representation. But to other people in this district, they would disagree. And I certainly would think that the urban population would consider that not to be fair and effective representation. But that is the challenge that I put to the council and for you to consider. Fair and effective representation is not reducing representation by removing rural ward councillors. I want to talk now about community boards. I have family that live and farm in the Tasman District Council, and I discussed with them just on this weekend what was their view on community boards. It was one word: toothless. Their simple advice was, do not go there. I struggle to see how 4 members are going to be elected and 2 members appointed to community boards. What is the process? I just see it as a process that's not going to work. Just on the community boards, there's no information about the proposed community boards, their terms of reference, whether they have delegated authority or a budget. Community boards, in my view, will have no ability to influence decision. There is some reference to efficiency. How? I struggle to understand that. Community boards will not operate and travel for nothing, and we've had that clarified this morning by the staff. So reducing the number of councillors by 2 or 3 and then having 3 community boards, each with 6 people, is not creating efficiency in my view. Lastly, I just want to raise another matter, and that is governance. When councillors enter this building, they are there to represent all the population of the district and leave their personal views at the door. And that is the same whether you're on a school board of trustees or any other role of governance. Human nature makes this a challenge. Successful governance for the whole district is to have a diversity of different skill sets and knowledge for which rural representation plays a key part. By having no rural councillors, the knowledge and understanding of all sectors, environmental, conservation, farming, ag, port, is lost. You potentially have a situation where councillors believe in what best affects them and the greater percentage of voters with no consideration for a balanced view on matters. Human nature may also influence advice from staff as what is best for the populace rather than the region. So without rural councillors, how can all viewpoints of the region be discussed? Removing the rural councillors and wards also means any direct voice that rural people have in policy setting, regulatory decisions, physical matter, and performance accountability. GDC represents a large geographical area and therefore needs balanced representation. The elected need to consider all discussion of viewpoints from across the district, and this cannot be done with no rural councillors. In my opinion, the preferred option is to have at least 3, preferably 4 rural councillors, 8 city councillors, and no community boards. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today.
Thank you very much. Brendan. Just one question for me. Do you believe there is a rural-urban split within the council as it is now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Pat. Thank you. Welcome. Nice to see you, Pat.
I will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to read my submission so that I do keep to time. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. As you've noted, I'm Patricia Seymour. I'm a resident of Whangarā on the East Coast and have been a resident in that location for 50 years. It's not about a role for any incumbent. It's about ensuring rural communities in this district have representation voting at the council table. My points are that I do not wish to see effective democracy further eroded in this review. This district is large and relatively sparsely populated, and you've got the maps up there. The rural communities are entitled to have an effective and accountable voice at the council table. The amalgamation of the Waipu County, Cook County, Waikahu County and Gisborne City Council, along with the Harbour Board and the Catchment Board, formed the Unitary Authority and the first meeting was in November 1989. The first iteration of the Gisborne District Council had 8 elected urban and 8 elected rural councillors. That was an agreement they reached at that particular time. And I'll just give you a quote from Mayor John Clark that was made in 2006 and is quoted in a most recent documentary written about the whole of this district. The original 8 urban, 8 rural council mix was fortunate. That was the most committed and productive council of my 12 years of leadership. It had a great desire to work together for the good of the district. And former councillor Cave is sitting behind us. So from the amalgamation of 4 local authorities 30 years ago, where the rural residents and ratepayers had ready access to the face of their elected representative, to a scenario suggested today of maybe 9 councillors elected at large, effectively removes the opportunity for rural voters to hold any local councillor to account. The purpose of local government is to provide for democratic and effective local government that recognises the diversity of local communities. Democracy entitles the residents of small local rural townships on the East Coast and on the West, pastoral farmers and forestry landowners to be able to vote for and for their vote to have value. The potential for any rural community to be able to elect their preferred candidate to the council is slim if elections at large follow the largest population base. So from the 8-8 scenario of 1989, we went down to 8-6, and at the last review in 2012, reflecting the reduced population in our rural wards, we went to a mix of 9-4. Population numbers in the 2 coast wards today do not fit the plus or minus 10%, as you've highlighted earlier. There's no denying that fact. And on the West and on the Poverty Bay lifestyle blocks, they have a larger lifestyle population and horticulture, and they do still represent within that 10%. But what is important on the East Coast to ensure the residents can have true value from their vote? We have many small townships, a number of primary schools in Kura. We have 3 area schools where children can complete their secondary schooling. We have small tertiary study units from the city-based learning, and we have small communities. These small communities need access to a councillor committed to ensure that their issues are raised and supported and solutions are sourced for them. Distances are large. It's 3 hours travel from the top of East Coast, which is provided here for you, from up here to Hicks Bay, down here to the city, without taking into account any of the side roads that also are the homes to many of our community. So it is the regular access and accessibility that the community value their councillor or their plural councillors for. Roading is a challenge in our rural areas, and while in a perfect world one might expect the system to respond to the issues logged around roading, it is frequently the follow-up that ultimately gets the task attended to. It is the reality that out of sight is out of mind, and an issue affecting many people is sometimes more important than one affecting a few. In my view, it is unrealistic to imagine that a unitary authority with the scope of the activity that we have here can conduct responsible and effective governance by 9 elected members, and you've highlighted that yourself this morning. I don't believe it was well thought through that 9 people would effectively govern a unitary authority of the geographical size that this organisation is. Then, as we'll see in a moment, divest some councillors to being responsible for potential community boards. There has not been a lot of thought put into the operationalising of 9 councillors. So if there are community boards as suggested, with 2 councillors on each, that's 6 councillors attending to community boards. There'll be committees and functions that do not go away. So where is the person power going to come from to govern this large area with only 9 people? To think that this might be provided by community committees of 2 people from each current ward plus 2 councillors is completely unrealistic in my view. I draw your attention to the current wards and I refer to the coast, but the same applies to the west. And I think this is a very important point that hasn't been thought through, though one of the previous speakers noted our many communities. So the scenario suggested is 2 elected community board members from the North Ward and 2 from here. Now, there would be 10 small townships and communities along the coast. The groups here have very little in common with the groups to the south, and I tested that just last week with a couple from Hicks Bay who were in this organisation for another reason, and asked them what their common interests were with the townships of Tolaga Bay or Tukumara Bay, and they said none. So wisdom in here is thinking of putting 2 people representing each ward onto a community committee, giving it 2 councillors and suggesting it deals with communities of interest. I suggest to you that that's not so. If we were to create 6 community boards, then we would be addressing communities of interest, but we know that that's not a realistic way to perform. So I just want people to be really clear. Having lived on the coast and in those communities for 50 years, I think I have fairly good understanding of how our communities function. So likewise, the issues for Matawai Motu, which sit up here, are completely different from the townships of Tarahira Patatai, which is very highly developed, intensive horticulture and agriculture, or Manatuki Murawai, Maori townships down here. This is pastoral farming, some forestry, quite extensive, distance to roads and travel. So our townships have quite different needs. So I respectfully suggest that the solution that will allow for fair and more effective representation is a model of 2 wards, a city ward of 9 councillors and a rural ward of 3 councillors. The current population being used, and again I take this from data that has been made available, the current population being used is 48,500. If you divide that by 12, you get 4,041 per member. And if you then divide, the ward population, the rural ward population is currently 13,240. If you divided that by 3, if that were 3 rural wards, you'd get 4,400 per member. So that would be a compliant model. 1 rural ward elected at large across the whole region allows people to divest themselves of the councillor if they don't like them, if they don't deliver, and the urban ward of the 9 makes the numbers balance. I strongly believe in the right of rural communities to have a voice at the council table, not filtered through a committee, and the rural voters retain that right to elect and replace their councillors, and not to have a diminished role in a large, elected at large scenario. That's my submission. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
I've just got a question. And so you talked about all those different communities of interest and how the community boards wouldn't, just by having 2 from, wouldn't necessarily reflect it. Do you think that having a rural ward at large, do you think whoever is elected, are there areas within the rural area that have a larger population? So could that argument also be used to say that there would be more rural councillors from a certain area within the rural area?
I hear what you're saying, thank you. The population is probably denser in Tarahiru Patatahi because that's a lot of lifestyle blocks and horticultural blocks, so they're obviously geographically smaller. But generally then, that's the orange on the map that you've got. Across the whole of this area, there are small rural townships, but then the rest of our area is probably pretty much extensive pastoral farming. So I think that that would be a much fairer scenario. You could say that you may get a couple of people out of Tarahiru, but I don't really think so. I think our voting public are mature and sensible, and they will see that that there is voting across the district. I have heard it said that because we're only one ward, one councillor at the minute, and the people in the city, someone in the rural area might want to vote for them. Well, that's actually worrying about the one ward, it's worrying about the one councillor. This is worrying about how do we serve our population that we're elected to serve. It's not about any elected individual. It's about meeting the needs of our rural communities alongside our urban communities and actually having feet under the table that actually understand the businesses, as has been alluded to already by at least two of the speakers this morning, that we need urban people to understand what the urban issues are. We need horticulture and agriculture and rural communities, Māori, across the whole broad spectrum, which we do have. I mean, without even having any designated seats, this is a very strong, diverse community of elected councillors.
Thank you very much. Donald, is there anything you need? No? Great. Thank you so much for your time. Nicholas. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. I'm Nick Seymour, and I relish the opportunity to come and talk to you because I do. Because I've lived in this region for 55 years, and I've worked at the Waikura, which is right at the top of an most isolated area of New Zealand, really. It's the furthest place away from a city than any other place in New Zealand. And I've lived in Whangarā for 55 years and run a small business, which is a farm, and it's 800 hectares, and we've been quite successful doing that. So we know the ramifications of living rural and also living with a councillor. My car goes out the road at least 4 days a week from council business. My concern stems from the lack of voice of rural ratepayers would have on a council with all councils elected at large. And this is because some of them aren't well-known names as they are in town. As a matter of fact, the local radio runs out on the Tolaga Bay Gorge, which is only 30, not even 30 k's from Gisborne. So you're not getting the local news apart from Ngāti Porou radio station further north. Communications are poor on the coast. We're all, or not all of us, but we are high-value ratepayers. We pay substantially for few services. We provide our own water supply, our wastewater. We take care of our culverts and protect our native vegetation. I'm a committed conservationist, not a real green one, but I have done more than most green people have done. I have 40 hectares of PMAs fenced from livestock. I have a forestry block, and I have planted over 20,000 poles and willow poles for conservation work for soil retention, not erosion, for soil retention. We need at least 3 rural-based councillors who have a deep and skeletal overview of how the rural communities and in our rural townships function. The issues are totally different to the issues of city-based communities. Isolation, in many cases poor road access, flooding, transport are all issues affecting rural communities. Rates remain a significant burden for rural businesses and rural townships. The councillor with a good grasp and a good rating process and ability to be aware of the implications of change to the rating system is important. A community board will not bring that level of representation to the rural community. They will not be directly involved at the rate setting and budgets at council. And democracy demands a voice at a council table for fair and effective governance available to all. And community boards. I'll give you two instances that we've been involved with. We have an interest in Ohope, we're in Bay of Plenty, and they had specifically had a community district from Wakatani. At their latest representation review, a number of community boards were reduced at the whim of the council, of course. And the Ohope board merged with Wakatani. If ever there was a specific community of interest there, then Ohope was one, but it no longer exists. If it was successful, I'm sure it would still be meeting. And I spent 3 years on a community board. It was conservation board, and we had people from all regions of the conservation estate. Each one had his own agenda. Each one put their point of view through, and some had private agendas as well, and that's when I got out. I couldn't bear this. It wasn't a community board. It just wasn't set up properly. Townships. Our townships have hapu with their own meeting process, and we have federated farmers and farming business groups who can do function in support of special interest groups in their areas. We have horticultural groups on the flats and in the Paratai ward, apple growers, wine growers, citrus growers, we all have vegetable croppers and take an interest in the issues arise in affecting their families and business. These groups use their local specialised groups to raise issues with local government when issues are occurrent. Water allocation, poor roads, drainage, lack of street lights in a village. They don't need to wait for a community board meetings to take action. They currently have direct access to a councillor who will seek their solution for issues before issues arise. The same rural community have the ability to select and deselect their councillor if they're not satisfied. The democratic right to elect amongst their own, it will be denied if a proposed scenario. So that's just a couple of things I'd like to highlight. As farmers, we are high value ratepayers, and rural wards or seats will fully represent at the council table. And we have a community board and can say everything it likes, but it doesn't get to the table where the decisions are made. The community boards don't work, and well, explained that, they have no power. There's difficulty for some councillors to get the grips of the intricacies of the council finances now, and a community board a member would have no show of knowing what's going on. I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Nick.
So Nick, just give me a sense of the level of comfort that the rural communities have at the moment with the current structure.
Yes.
You talked about a lot of the change. I just want to get a bit of a feel. I'm getting a sense that you're able to get messages through into what we would call the machine, the council. Give me a feel. What's the mood currently with the way you are represented?
Well, on the coast, I think they're very comfortable with their councillor.
Not the person, the position I'm interested in.
For the results she gets for them, not her personality, but for the results she gets to this table.
Yeah. So there's a sense that you're offering that the rural communities representation at the moment works.
It's working well.
Do you support the proposition of 2 wards, 1 rural, 1 city, and at large?
Personally, I don't.
Mm-hmm. What would you see? You see status quo as the
Status quo.
option?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Donald, anything you need to know? Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Trevor.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to make my presentation.
It is our pleasure, sir. Thank you.
I'm Trevor Brown, and I've been farming at Ngarapis, that's 30 kilometres west of Gisborne, since 1984. Not so long ago, the number of rural councillors on the Gisborne District Council was reduced from 6 to 4. I believe the proposed changes might reduce our current representation of rural councillors even further. I do not believe that we currently have enough rural councillors to represent us. Society appears to be becoming more urbanised, creating ignorance amongst urban dwellers of the needs of rural residents. I suggest that this manifests as a serious disconnect between our 9 urban councillors and the needs of the rural wards. The media has recently portrayed an image of the council becoming obsessed with non-essential feel-good projects at the expense of improving and maintaining our basic infrastructure. In my 34 years at Ngarapis, I've never seen our roads in a worse condition than they are now. The 17 kilometres of tar seal from the Waipawa Bridge roundabout to the Ngarapis School is continually breaking up. The soft patch repairs are very temporary. I suspect that the entire road will soon need the base metal replaced at tremendous cost. And this is just one road in the region. Our Campbell Road, where I live, is littered with deep potholes. Our requests for service go unanswered. I do not see how the Provincial Growth Fund will be sufficient to maintain our roads. The Gisborne District Council must concentrate more on basic infrastructure improvements and maintenance. In summary, I want to see a more effective voice for rural residents at the Gisborne Council table, and I do not see how the proposed changes will achieve this. Here's a couple of photos that I took of our local roads yesterday. sometime in the future, you might wish to take your families to the Eastwood Hill Arboretum, which is the National Arboretum of New Zealand. My fear is that you might be travelling there on a gravel road. Thank you for the opportunity to present my submission.
Thank you so much. Brendan.
Just make the observation that thankfully we're not here today to solve the potholes of the district. We are about representation, and you've highlighted that pretty strongly to us, that you feel that the current model is one that in essence works for you, and you are giving us a sense that a change in that model, in your view, diminishes the level of representation that you think is appropriate. I got that right?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Donald, have you got a question? No, thank you very much. Very clear presentation. Thank you. Now, we're just a wee bit ahead of time, so I was wondering, is Clive here? No. Oh, that's right. He's being represented by Padre William Gray. Is William here? No. Not yet. Okay.
He will be coming from some distance up the coast, so he'll come to the time.
Good as gold. We've got Federated Farmers representative, I know. Would you be happy to speak now? Yes. Thank you. That would be lovely.
Good morning, all.
Welcome.
Morning into the room. Good. Federated Farmers would like to thank the Local Government Commission for the opportunity to speak at the representation review today. My name is Sandra Faulkner. I am a farming partner in a fifth generation multi-enterprise farming business south of the city at Muriwai. But today I come to you as the president of the Gisborne Wairoa Province of Federated Farmers. For those of you not familiar with Federated Farmers, we are a voluntary member-based organisation that represents the needs and interests of farmers and rural businesses. Within the Gisborne Wairoa region, we have 250 members. Voluntary members, farming businesses, farming families, and high-value rate payers. Some of these members live in extremely remote areas. As you have heard, several members of ours travel well over 2.5 hours to reach the city of Gisborne. Gisborne's farmers face unique challenges because of their isolation, both geographical and social, and the nature of their jobs, weather dependency, variable terrain, animal welfare, physicality, just being some of them. It is our view that they need to be represented by local people at the council table that fully understand farming issues. Federated Farmers objects to the council's final proposals for the following reasons. Consultation. The consultation process was poor, and the review flew so far under the radar of most Gisborne residents. Consequently, we doubt that the council has a mandate to promote such dramatic changes. Indeed, the initial review was so poorly publicised that none of our members even raised the alarm, surprising in its own fact. The council only received 31 submissions and views were very mixed. Some of those submissions even expressed concern about the lack of information about the review in its first place. GDC, in fact, accepts that future consultations could be better coordinated and branded so as to maximise participation, a quote. Comprehensive information about the review is difficult to find on the website. Secondly, a decrease in councillors from 13 to 9 councillors. Our members do not want our councillors to be reduced by such a dramatic fashion. The council has yet to explain how it arrived at this number, or why indeed it will be better for our governance system for fair and effective representation. We are not confident that 9 councillors can successfully run a unitary authority. Regional functions, freshwater, soil conservation, flood protection, pest management, etc., increase the complexity of the issues our council deals with, and indeed the workload of those councillors. Having as few as 9 councillors would make the Gisborne District Council an outlier in terms of governance structure. The Chatham Islands is the only other unitary authority with fewer commissioners, and they have a total population of 650 people. Thirdly, abolition of electoral wards. Our members do not believe there is widespread support for the removal of the electoral wards. The Gisborne District Council consultation in December of 2017 indicated that our communities value their local representation. Only 7 of the 31 submissions on the initial proposals supported a reduction in wards, and the hearings report of the 10th of May 2018 states the majority of submitters are satisfied with the current ward structure. We believe that access to local rural councillors enables farmers to access and participate more effectively in local government. Fewer and fewer people understand farming, given that even here in Gisborne, up to 79% of Gisborne's population is rural based. Rural councillors are fully cognizant of the realities of farming and the issues that face multi-million-dollar businesses in our rural communities. Gisborne covers a large geographical area. There are lots of small isolated communities in that area, as you have heard this morning, from the East Cape to Matawai to the Whareirata Hills. Farmers are part of a distinct and vulnerable community of interest. Being geographically and socially isolated, they run businesses that are land and labour intensive, with distinct views and concerns to the rural population. To the urban population. GDC's finance and funding policies are complex. It is simply unrealistic to expect community boards to get to grips with them so as to adequately represent the views of rural people. Lastly, community boards. Our members object to the establishment of community boards. We don't consider that there is a widespread support for the establishment of community boards, being only 5 of 31 submissions GDC received on the initial proposals supported the establishment of community boards. Their establishment was also not supported in earlier consultations in December of 2017. There isn't enough information for Gisborne people, either rural or urban, to make an informed decision about community boards. There is no information about their terms of reference. There is no information about whether they will have delegated authority, and there is no information about whether they will have a budget. We believe that community boards will reduce rural representation. A community board reports to the council. They do not sit on it. And they do not make decisions about policy, regulation and finance like a councillor does. A rural community board is akin to a rural consultation group, and as you've heard earlier, they currently exist. Our experience in other regions suggests that they are of very little real benefit to farmers and their rural communities. So in conclusion, I would like to conclude by saying that we understand that there are some adjustments required to our governance system in order to ensure that great governance remains equitable and better complies with our Local Government Electoral Act. Irrespective of how they are elected, it is our very firm position that Gisborne needs to retain at least 3 rural councillors to ensure adequate representation of our farming and rural communities. And with that said, on behalf of Federated Farmers, I would like to thank you all for hearing us today.
I need to go back to the observation you made about consultation. Given some of the observations that have been made around how significant and broad the consultation was, can you give me a sense around how come you didn't know about the proposition in relation to community boards? Just give me that feel. I'm out of the district though. Sure. We're blind to what occurs. I just want to understand.
Our rural communities rely on the consultation meetings that the Gisborne District Council rolls out across their time as they bring these significant packages to their ratepayers. I don't believe that it was highlighted potentially or brought to the attention of rural ratepayers to a degree where they could understand the large impact that this was going to have on the current system. I don't believe that our members are against change for change's sake. They understand the need for efficient, great governance. This is a large business that this Gisborne District Council unitary authority runs. It has got to be governed well, but I don't believe also that our members would have failed to engage in a consultation that had this much impact on the way they are currently represented if it was well consulted. Now, I was not at every, I myself personally was not at every community meeting during that period, clearly. But I don't believe that our members would be so backward as to not come forward if they felt that things were that sort of change was afoot.
You mentioned that there was a quote that you quoted the council. Can you tell me where that quote came from?
Not right now, but I could certainly find out for you. Yes, absolutely, I'll find that for you. Yes.
Thank you.
I do have a note on it as to where to find that information, so I will find that for you.
This is kind of a question that's a little hard for you to answer, but if the council had gone out to the community with community boards highlighted as an option instead of the wards, do you think that your members would have been more engaged in the process?
I think they would have been very active.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. Donald. Lovely. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
So I think we'll just break for morning tea now, since we're a little ahead. Very efficient and effective presentations. Thank you so much. So we will be back in action at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody again. We're ready to go. Sorry about the slightly elongated break, but we were so efficient and effective that we went quicker than normal. So I know that the next submitter is Clive Bibby, and he was unable to be here. So he's being represented by Padre, and we've got two names. We've got William and Wiramu. Which one would you like?
I'm quite comfortable.
Either one. Fantastic. Would you like to come up, sir? We're really looking forward to hearing your presentation on behalf of Clive. And so 10 minutes to present and then 5 minutes for us to ask questions would be wonderful. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Now, stand or seat, whatever you feel comfortable. Thank you.
Te atata hara me te whakaro, e pāne ki te karanga. E re wātu te tahi o wā uri o te tanga hau, hara mei te maumai ngā whakaro tō mātou iwi. Kia puhio ai tātou me pehe te kōro, pehe hia. O tō wātou iwi, e mahui ki te tanga. And so, I just want to say I'm honoured to be here today to represent a large faction and how a dual culture might come together to address the very issue that is of paramount importance for the well-being of Uawa and the outlying districts. So to you, commissioners representing the government, councillors, lady, staff, and distinguished guests. Excuse my language. I just want to be, I'm here today to present a submission on behalf of Clive Bibby. I guess, firstly, in brief, I just want to introduce myself. For those that don't know me, my name is William Thomas Gray, more commonly referred to as Padre. I led a 25 distinguished service with the Defence Forces, namely the Army, retiring with the rank of Captain. In 1987, I was awarded the Queen's Service Medal. In 1990, I was appointed the Office of Justice of the Peace. 2017, I was made a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit. That same year, I was awarded the New Zealand Award of the Year. And lastly, I was appointed to the Holy Order of Archdeacon for the Anglican Church. As a leading figure and a leader amongst our community of Uawa and the outlying districts, it gives me great pleasure not only to represent him, but to speak for the man that wrote the submission, but just as equally important, I find myself in good stead to represent Clive Bibby and to read his submission.
Thank you.
And so, due to unforeseen circumstances, the writer of this submission, Mr. Clive Bibby, is unable to attend the hearing this morning and has asked me to read this opinion piece in his absence. I have known Clive for over 40 years, and during that period, we have found, raised our respective families and worked on community projects together. I can't think of a more qualified person to represent a dual culture, a multicultural community, than a multifaceted pastoral industry located in the rural sector. It's because he understands us all, he understands our needs, but just as equally important, he is one of us. His opinions are well worth listening to. And so the following is Mr. Bibby's submission. My submission is in support of the adoption of an electoral system that would see, one, 7 city-based councillors elected at large. 2, a minimum of 3, but preferably 4 rurally based councillors elected at large. 3, no rural community committees. And so the background of the submission. It is no surprise that the New Zealand system of democracy is the envy of the world. Our respective position in the Commonwealth of Nations isn't something that just evolved over time. It has been diligently crafted based on the very best English law. But more importantly, it is a result of successive leadership groups striving to build representation systems that are inclusive, irrespective of necessity, social standing, or cultural background. The success of their endeavours to establish electoral systems that are fair and effective is best illustrated by the multi-party method of government we have chosen. Huge efforts have been made to ensure special interest groups representing the different ideology, sexual preference, and social standing are accommodated at national level in a way we vote at general elections, and until recently in a similar fashion at local government level. Unfortunately, some Te Rāwhiti individuals think that our current system of representation is outmoded and are calling for one that will satisfy their own selfish objectives. The level of arrogance implying they know best is palpable. They should not be allowed to succeed. These people have seized on a technicality from the Local Government Act to use a hammer to break open systems that have served us well for decades. They want to replace it with a form that doesn't even qualify, using our traditional cornerstones of democracy, of fairness and equal opportunity. It is difficult to accept that these same councillors and their supporters would deny rural ratepayers representation by members of their own kind, yet would cry blue murder if the current proposal was being used to deny them the same privilege. The very suggestions that these unfortunate individuals consider themselves adequate alternatives to the current rural councillors is offensive and an insult to the intelligence of all people living outside the city boundaries. Their aims are a contradiction of the basic tenets of modern democracy, where one man's vote is worth as much as any of his or her countrymen or women. I am concerned that there are still people in our society who think this way. The guidelines for fair and effective representation should really be based on factors that allow for a type of service that covers all those groups who suffer from, amongst other things, the limits of isolation, inadequate health services, and recreational facilities, and long delays for repairs to power reticulation and roading infrastructure during a civic emergency. It follows that fair representation should provide equal across, equal access to the decision makers, and build confidence that all ratepayers are represented by individuals who fully understand their constituents and their problems. The proposal to include district committees as a compensation for otherwise poor representation is a red herring and would do little to advance the opinions of rural communities at the council table. Anyone who has attended actually care little for the thoughts of others. If an elected rural councillor tried that approach, they would quickly become history. There is nothing like the ballot box every 3 years to keep rural councillors working for a widely scattered constituency. Nobody could do their job without a total commitment to those they serve. Demands of their times are huge. Compare their responsibility to those of other 7 councillors representing the city constituents. 2 or 3 of their numbers could adequately serve the constituency on push bikes. Only a fool would believe that a group of city-based councillors would turn off their favourite TV programs, hop into their red van, and travel hundreds of kilometres to listen to a couple of farmers at the end of a remote but productive road. It is a joke to even suggest that they might want to try. 3 rural councillors won't be enough, but it will be better than being without the familiar face of someone who understands. And I just want to conclude by acknowledging Pat Seymour, who has been actively involved, and Bill Burnett, who brings this submission about a reality that's attending to the needs and call of our people. Nā reira, kia ora tata, kia ora tata.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you so much. And you've done quite great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Simon, hey, are you here? Lovely. Sorry, you're a bit out of order because we've
That's okay.
Thank you.
No problem. I've got 3 copies here. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present this morning, and I must say, in my opening comments, I do want to say that it's the first time that I've ever seen the presentation, council presentation, which was shown today. And I do consider myself, as an ex-councillor, reasonably well informed, and I do my best to try to keep up with what's going on in the region. But I have never seen that before. I understand there was booklets circulated at the time of the annual plan meetings, but I did attend our local annual plan meeting, and then there was a heap of books and things there, but I don't know how many people took them home and how many people actually digested them. So I just want to make that comment. And the other comment I do want to make is that we've had a system operating since 1989, which was deemed to be fair. But I've heard the comment this morning that the changes are also deemed to be fair, but they're chalk and cheese, so I'm not quite sure how both can be deemed to be fair. But anyway, moving on from that, the other thing that has struck me as I've been listening this morning is about the community boards. And the biggest problem in the region, in the district that I have, is the roads which are being trashed through big use with logging trucks. Now, we've had numerous meetings out in our region, but I'm not sure how a community board will make the slightest difference to the biggest need in the area that I live, because we've had good consultation, but there hasn't been any upgrades to the road as yet. And the other thing I do want to say at the beginning is I do want to commend Federated Farmers' submission, which was tabled on the 25th of June. And I think that's a really very worthy submission. And it says a lot that hasn't been said this morning. And I just want to commend that to you as well. And the other comment I want to make in opening is to say that in 1989, at the time of amalgamation, the then Mayor, John Clark, was at pains to enunciate that we are now one council, because there was rural counties and the city council. And he was at pains, it's through over probably the period of the first 12 months, to remind councillors, the new councillors and everyone, that we were one council and we represented the whole region. So in my opening comments, I do want to say that I find it rather disappointing that we are now in a situation we are looking to perhaps turn the clock back, and the rural community has to come into a forum like this to defend its democratic rights. And I do feel that that is really, really disappointing. But those are my opening comments. In a way of introduction, I want to just say that I was a councillor from the time of amalgamation, 1989, and I retired after 4 terms in 2001. Prior to that, I was very involved with Federated Farmers and very involved in the recovery program post-Cyclone Bola. So in that capacity, I travelled at length over the district from one end to the other numerous times, and with various people who came up from Wellington to, and I must say, the more you go around the district, the more you realise how diverse it is and what a huge region it is outside of the city. So I represented the Cook Ward, which is on the western side, which has now been renamed, but is represented by Graham Thompson. And I believe it's well worth looking back at that time. I know that time moves on and populations change and all that, but it is well worth looking back to the establishment of the Gisborne Region's Unitary Authority and how it was set up. The 1989 Local Government Forum was designed by a specially appointed Local Government Commission, and which was chaired by Brian Elwood. The commission itself was appointed by the Minister of Local Government, Michael Bassett, and this massive restructure saw the end of all the rural county councils throughout the country. It was a major reform. The commission at that time, in its great wisdom, realised there was a need for the establishment of rural wards in this region, and recognised that rural voters would be seriously disadvantaged and outvoted without separate wards in the region. And I don't believe anything's really changed. At the time of amalgamation, the Gisborne District Council took over the activities of boards like the Casperton Board and many others. And to assist in this transition, it even set up a special Rural Services Committee to assist with that transition. So that was, I just mentioned that because it just stresses the importance of having a rural association. So now we fast forward 29 years to 2018, and the region's vast rural community is suddenly facing the prospect of losing its rural electoral representation altogether. I know there'll be community boards and all that, but it will actually lose it. It's got a 99% chance, I would guess, of losing its representation around the council table. That this could even be contemplated is really quite extraordinary. Should the rural seats be abolished, it would be the biggest and most negative change since 1989 in the regional electoral system, and be a big step backwards in my view. I don't believe there's been a real effort by the council to inform and properly consult throughout the rural community. Such a change as this should have merited a similar consultative round of meetings as the annual plan meetings. And I know those are extensive, but I believe this change, which is so radical, should have had the same status as the annual plan meetings. And nobody that I've been able to talk to has suggested that any of those meetings actually took place. There may have been some, but I'm certainly not aware of them. So I'm saying that this special meeting should have been called in all the key rural districts. As far as I know, that was not done. Should the proposal to abolish rural wards go ahead, then next year I would expect that the rural electorate, when the voting papers come out, will suddenly realise what's actually happened, and they could come to the conclusion that they've actually been ambushed. I know that's strong words, but the reality is that I don't believe the rural community is at all well informed what's happening, And I don't believe that at this point in time, they realise what could actually happen. Anyway, moving on, the proposal would in effect see the rural electorate disenfranchised with no voting rights around the council table or at the committee tables, and that's very important. It's not just actually the council table, it's all the committees that go with it. Rural, as has been mentioned this morning, rural councillors are essential to preserve the balance within the council. Community boards are no substitute in my view. Yet it is essential that there are rural councillors at the table to advocate for rural needs. Only 14% of submitters supported the formation of community boards in the initial submissions that were received, and neither did Brian Elwood's commission when it created this unitary authority way back in 1989. And I know that the electoral process is about people and numbers, and I know there's some difficulties with keeping a balance of the numbers in the right places. But this area is an agribusiness region, huge in actual fact. And I want to know, if I could, just take some time to go through a few figures to illustrate how big this region is and how important agriculture is to this region. So the importance of agriculture and forestry is worthy of special mention. Data from Activate Tarifiti shows that the agricultural sector is by far the largest contributor to the regional GDP. The Federated Farmers has indicated it alone has over 400 members. Now, the 2017 data from Statistics New Zealand indicates that there are 2,706 rural properties in the region. There are 675 rural properties in the agribusiness sector under 200 hectares. There are 294 in the 200 to 1,000 hectares range. There's 141 in the 1,000 to 2,000 hectare range, and 36 in the 2,000 to 4,000 range, and 15 over 4,000 hectares. Now, especially that latter group, they'll have multiple families and residents living on those properties. And I'll bet you that none of those people will realise what's coming in terms of their electoral power. Some samples of the region produces 53% of the national sweet corn production and is the 4th largest wine producer in New Zealand. All up, it has some 300 horticultural and cropping farms. That was one lot of data I got, but I think it's probably a lot more than that. And it's well known that the diversity is huge and impressive. And then we come to the rural townships, which has already been mentioned. And on the council database, I counted about, there was listed about 12, but there's probably many more than that. But on a quick count, the tallies from Tineroto in the southwest up to Hicks Bay, there's at least 12, and I'm sure if you delve further, you'd find many, many more. And those are really important little townships. With this background, it raises the question why this region would want to abandon the existing improved rural ward voting system. The argument of efficiency through having less council has never been explained or justified. And to date, Nelson, Marlborough, Tasman have retained 13 councillors with rural wards. And from what I've heard this morning, that setting up the board, the committees, and they're going to be manned by all these different people, the costs are going to escalate. So I doubt that there'll be any efficiencies at all, and no doubt there's going to be mileage involved for councillors to go to attend these meetings. So I don't go with that argument. And there's been no explanation how 9 councillors can do justice to the need for the separation between the various boards. And that was one thing that was pointed out right in the beginning when this unitary authority was set up, that it had to have a clear separation between the different functions of the authority. And with only 9 councillors, and 9 councillors also who are going to be going around attend to all the different board meetings, I just wonder how that's going to actually have board committees. I wonder how they're going to actually in reality be able to keep up. But maybe they can. But I would just go to say there's no way community boards can have equal a voice and a vote around the council table. All the community boards can do is advocate from an arm's length. No doubt, being new, they'll start with some degree of enthusiasm and a large degree of hope. but time will surely prove that this new and assumed authority and power will turn out to be nothing less than an illusion. And as I understand, that's been proven, been found in many of the other districts around New Zealand. And soon it will be followed by a measure of disappointment and frustration with the community board structure. There are already varying and very direct ways that residents can make their views heard without this two-step process. And the council now generally is very, very good in terms of having an open door policy. And the mayor goes out of the way to allow people to come in and make a representation. And I think that anybody that's really serious about making a representation to this council will find a way of doing it. That you can ring the counter, you can send emails in, and there's a very, very good communication process, and I would commend the council on that. So I see no reason why we have to go through this two-step process of having an elongated process where people have to go to these community boards and then it's going to be passed back through the councillors. Apparently the council vote on this was taken when two rural councillors were away. Now I understand that is the case, and I think that was a shame because those two councillors would have no doubt enunciated a completely different view. And I understand the mayor was not present as well, and he's a man who travels the whole district. He knows the district very well, and it's a shame that he wasn't present as well. I conclude by saying that I'm opposed to the proposal to reduce the number of councillors to 9, to abolishing the rural wards. Further, I'm opposed to the establishment of community boards, but I do, and I'm really in favour of the status quo, but I do understand there has to be some retweaking because the numbers of population has changed a bit. So I would say, I would just conclude by saying it's a cliche, but it's so true to say that if it's not broken, why fix it? Thank you.
I really only have to go back to the guts of the question is you made the observation that you don't think rural people know about what's being proposed. And I need you to try and help me to quantify how you make that statement.
Well, all I can say is the people that I know and the people that attend the annual plans meeting in the district where I live. And I've talked to them since, and none of those people seem to be aware of the significance of the change. And I mean, the rural community, they're busy people. In some areas, there's no cell phone coverage. There's no, as has been alluded to this morning, a lot of people out there don't get the newspapers. So I'm at a loss to really understand how they're fully acquainted with what's happening.
And in addition, you made the observation that you wondered how 9 councillors could deliver the services necessary as a unitary authority. Do you have any sense at the moment of the level of commitment that councillors currently make?
I am. I've been a councillor and I know it's considerable, it's huge. It's not only the actual physical attendance, but it's also the stimulation of the information so that they can make valued decisions. And if the councillors are going to be expected to travel to these board committees, and no doubt those are going to revolve around the district. I don't imagine they're going to be at a fixed location every time. And this has been referred to this morning about the distance up to Rotorua in places. How can city council, people who live in the city, be well informed of what's happening in Rotorua? They may be on a given issue, but how can they be well informed throughout the 3-year period and keep up with all their needs down here? Their needs down here are considerable. I mean, just the rating process alone and coming to terms with that and the decisions that have to be made. And I just feel that that'll be one of the reasons why the system will fall apart.
And last question is the establishment of community boards. Are you able to paint a picture of what, from what you've learned, you understand they will do?
I think I've read up the minutes of one particular and the agendas of one particular community board, and it didn't really look earth-shattering to me, and I wondered why, with the structure that was around it, whether it was really warranted. I mean, there may be some that are working well around the country, but I've talked to a number of people who do know a lot more about them than I do, and they haven't been able to get any positive feedback.
I suppose just last question. Given you've clearly got a significant understanding and interest, what I'm trying to understand is from what has been presented through this process, have you got a sense around what you think the community boards are expected to deliver should they be established?
I think I have, and I saw the presentation earlier on, and I just think it's just going to elongate the whole process. I mean, residents will no doubt feel good about going along to those meetings, but can those meetings deliver the expectation? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, are you guys ready to present, or would you like a couple of minutes? Ready? Ready? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. It is a shame that we don't get to hear today from all our members of the community who support the final proposal. Many of the issues outlined here today were operational and management issues. We are here to discuss the future structure of the council's governing body and not to debate operational matters. I would like to address I've made a few notes of comments that I picked up, which I would like to just highlight before I carry on with clarifying our process. Just a few clarifications. Councillors can be elected from any and everywhere in our region. We know that the city, as well as our rural areas, have great candidates. As a council, we are looking at how we elect district councillors. We are not proposing taking away any representation from any rural area. We are in fact adding to it. We are only looking at how we elect our councillors. At this stage, it is well clear that the rural councillors have to serve a massive area with so many differing communities of interest that were highlighted by some rural councillors. By adding more people in their networks to these vast areas can only add to the diversity, where a more diverse range of community representation will be achieved. We can say maybe tangata whenua as well as farming representation. In general, I just want to clarify the process that we followed because there was a bit of confusion with some of the submitters. On the 10th of May, we had our 4-hour workshop that I alluded to earlier, where 2 of our rural councillors and the mayor weren't there, but everyone else was there. And that is when we worked through all submissions to our initial proposal. And like I stated before, it was a robust process where we slowly worked through all options. We then made a recommendation to council, and that happened on the 17th of May. All councillors were present at our meeting on the 17th of May, and that's when we formally adopted our final proposal. There were no apologies, no notice of motion, and no votes recorded against that decision. So I just wanted to clarify that there were 2 separate meetings. And at the last meeting where we adopted our formal presentation, everyone, the mayor and all councillors were there. To reiterate, we consulted widely and went over and above our statutory requirements Our engagement took advantage of our most effective consultation avenues, such as social media, our website, the Gisborne Herald, flyers, etc. For our initial proposal, we also aligned it with our local long-term plan consultation, which I have to say have won national awards, and we are very, very confident in this engagement process. There are far bigger councils with far larger populations and complications that have less numbers of councillors. They are effective because they stick to governance matters. I agree with what Mr. Hamish Cave said earlier. Once elected, councillors must represent the interest of the community as a whole. Wards in our communities of interest. To be clear, council did consider a rural ward option, where 3 members in the rural ward would be elected at large, and a city ward where 8 members were elected. But the issue was about having communities of interest represented. Preliminary consultation identified the East Coast as an area of distinct community interest, a distinct community of interest. And you may have had a situation under a rural ward at large scenario where all representatives were elected from the Western area. Geographically, we have a huge rural area. Hence, we introduced the community board with subdivisions to service that. Our district is connected. We have interest in the rural and in the city. We have ownership interest and iwi interests. There are clear, distinct iwi interests in the rural and city areas. This plays to at large, but also against rural at large. We acknowledge that our rural residents and farmers play an important and valued role in our community, as well as our regional economy. However, we also respectfully acknowledge that theirs is just one point of view, and that there are many others that are not present at today's hearing, but that we considered as part of our decision-making process. To be clear, the rural sector as a whole was not identified as a one whole community of interest. Our community have been very clear on this. The East Coast see themselves very distinct from the Western rural area. Population change indicates a declining rural community, and despite the softening of the plus minus 10% rule for isolated community, I'm sure this cannot go on forever. We believe we have reached a point where change as well as future-proofing is needed. You heard from 2 of my colleagues who have stood unopposed in their rural wards, in one case for the past 3 election cycles, and the other case twice in the past 3 election cycles. What that means for representation in their wards is that the residents of 2 of our largest rural wards have had no say in who represent them on council, in one case for the last 9 years, and in the other case for 2 election cycles. But most importantly, the residents have had no say in who represent them on council at all, as they could only vote in that one ward where there was no election situation. So in effect, they had no ability to vote for any other councillors. So they had no say in who represented them on council at all. How can we deal with this? With our new proposed arrangement, every person in our region, including our rural region, will be able to vote for 9 councillors and a mayor, and we feel this is real representation. Just want to touch lastly on community boards. A 2018 survey of community boards by Callum and David Hammond confirms that while community boards have fewer powers, 76% regard their community board as effective. We introduced community boards because the community called for more representation and democratic participation. The finer operational details relating to community boards will be developed. But first, we need to confirm community boards. This is a process. We'll engage with our communities of interest to better define these matters. Elected members are entitled to delegate interests and budgets, and this is an option. Depending on the outcome, the terms of reference will be debated by the decision makers. We are not the first to have community boards, and I doubt we'll be the last. Staff have already started to think about operational aspects and are talking to other councillors who have successful models in place. We want to reiterate that community boards work at the grassroots, and this will enrich council's decision-making. This is often overlooked. So just to conclude, I want to say we are confident that we followed a thorough process where we tested options with our community. We listened to their feedback, and after considering everything on the table, we are confident that we reached a future-proof proposal that respects our communities of interest and provides fair and effective representation. Like I said before, as councillors, we respect the fact that if we ask for feedback, we need to listen and be prepared to change. This process that we followed, together with our final proposal, supported by council as a whole, I feel, and my fellow councillors feel, is a clear example of democracy in action, and we believe it is the most fair and effective representation model for Tairāwhiti's communities of interest, as well as for Tairāwhiti's future. Thank you.
Very much. So we'll just ask some questions now, if that's okay? Yep. So in hindsight, if you could start the process again, would you have the community boards given more higher profile within your initial options?
If I can run this process again, I would make sure that the 4-hour session we had on the 10th of May, we would have had that right in the beginning after our pre-consultation debate. If you take a look at the video links we sent to you, you can clearly see that we did not look at all options and we did not debate everything at that early stage. We definitely went with an approach where we thought we might test the status quo. It was only after, so there were not, you can see from the video link we sent you, it's 30 seconds worth of discussion, or 5 minutes. We then, once we received feedback from that initial discussion, we became aware that maybe our community is not that keen to stick to the status quo, and maybe we should be looking at community boards, which were mentioned earlier but wasn't pushed. And it is a new way of operating. We do know that. So for us, it's also the unknown, but worth trying if it's better and fairer representation. So to answer your question, I would have had us debate these issues earlier, thoroughly, as we did on the 10th of May. And I urge you to watch that video because you can see how we slowly work through all the options, test them through the lenses of communities of interest and better and fairer representation. And in the end, our final proposal were the one that were the best.
Okay, thank you so much. Brendan.
So the great challenge is trying to understand what it is you're expecting the community boards to deliver. So we've heard from submitters. I'm not really wanting to delve too much into who said what or how it was presented. The reality is the reality. I'm sure there's some learnings from there, but what I don't understand yet clearly enough is what today does this council believe if community boards were established, they would actually do? So I'm talking about the delegations. And I know that earlier on you answered we're not quite sure.
Yep, and
but I think the community needs to hear, I need to hear to help me. What is it? What does it mean? The decision process needs to understand what it's delivering.
So and you will see that when you watch the video, how we spoke about these vast, like the rural areas to the west and the eastern coast area, there are communities of interest that we want to make sure the voices come to the community table. By having those voices, so it will be 4 extra people in that vast area, 2 elected from the north and 2 elected from the south, which we feel bring their community contacts and their diverse views, because like today, we've heard mostly from the farming community, but those are not the only communities up the east coast or to the western rural area. So what we would like to achieve with our community boards is diverse representation that then comes back via the 2 appointed councillors on those boards to our decision making. So I hope I answer your question that way, because that is what we are trying to achieve.
I guess on that point is where I find it a little bit difficult, because when those 2 councillors are there listening to what the community board says, they are the only way that the views of the community board are going to go back to the council?
Well, there are different consultation. We will still be doing our normal consultation where people like Simon at the inset, people can reach councillors and they can email and they can make their submissions. But that way, we are clear that in that area, there are 4 people and their community networks who can talk directly to councillors, and we bring it to the council table. So to us, it feels we have more feet on the ground, more influence in those rural communities, but they also have a direct link back to the community, to the council table.
It's been mentioned that there's a rural-urban split. Do you believe that's so?
Yes.
So if there is a rural-urban split and urban councillors are then reflecting some of what they know, but they are still urban, how are they expected to vote?
But councillors can come from any area in our region and can be elected from anywhere. I don't live in the city. I live outside of the city, but I'm technically a city councillor at this stage. So what we are trying to do is elect people that are district councillors that can still get the information if they are appointed to a board where they might not be a rural person, but they might be appointed to a board which represent the rural area. We hope that the 4 community board members who serve with these 2 councillors will then be able to let the councillors know or help them to understand the issues that are unique to that area. So I don't see any problem with anyone elected around our table being able to fill those positions.
Okay, thank you very much. Lynn? Yeah, thank you. Donald, is there anything from a technical point of view? It's cool.
Thanks a lot.
Do you think, just a quick last question, and this, you've got yet to debate that, but when your council has to decide what kind of voting system to have, whether it's first past the post or STD, do you think that it should?
Not STD.
I do that.
We voted no for STD.
I've been doing that ever since I was a high school student. And before I opened my mouth then, I said, don't say that. And then I did. Oh. Anyway, having embarrassed myself yet again. So do you think if you do have an at-large voting system, that may change the view on what kind of electoral system, voting system you'd have?
It could possibly change, and every 3 years we do debate first past the post versus, now I can't say it, STD.
Good girl, don't say it.
In the past, we've definitely leaned towards the first past the post, but in future it might change, and we will be open to discuss it like we do every 3 years.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank
you everyone who has attended, and thank you for the wonderful professional way that this hearing has been conducted. It's a credit to your community that you present what I know are sometimes quite emotional issues in such a clear and professional way and such a respectful way. So congratulations, everyone. Thank you so much for all your preparation, and it's been an absolute pleasure being in a beautiful town. And we look forward to seeing you probably on a holiday, which would be much more fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.